Shohei Ohtani isn't just changing how baseball is played, he's changing how baseball is structured. And now, for the first time, the league has to answer a question it's never seriously faced before. At what point does accommodating greatness start to look like creating an advantage? Because this isn't about a swing, a pitch, or even a game. It's about a rule and how one extra roster spot might be quietly influencing outcomes in ways that are easy to miss but impossible to ignore. The Dodgers are off to another dominant start. High payroll, deep roster, elite development system. That part is expected. But layered on top of that is something more subtle. Because Ohtani qualifies as a two-way player, the Dodgers are allowed to carry a ninth reliever. Every other team is capped at 8. On paper, that doesn't sound like much. One extra arm, one additional option in the bullpen. But in modern baseball, that's not a small edge. That's structural flexibility. The obvious narrative is simple. The Dodgers are already loaded. Giving them an extra reliever is unfair. The rule should be removed. That's the argument Jim Bowden is making. And it resonates, especially when you consider the financial gap between Los Angeles and most of the league. But that argument stops at the surface, because it treats the extra reliever as a static advantage. In reality, it's dynamic, and its value depends entirely on how it's used. Let's break it down. A bullpen isn't just about having arms, it's about sequencing usage, matchups, rest cycles, late inning flexibility. With 8 relievers, most teams operate with tight constraints. If a starter exits early, the bullpen stretches thin. If extra innings hit, options disappear quickly. If back-to-back high-leverage games occur, fatigue builds. Now add a ninth reliever. Suddenly, the margins expand. You can absorb a short outing without overexposing your best arms. You can maintain matchup advantages deeper into games. You can avoid using a high-leverage reliever in a low-leverage spot. That's not just depth. That's control over how and when pressure is applied. Here's where it gets interesting. The Dodgers don't just have an extra reliever. They have a pitcher who is also a middle-of-the-order bat. That changes roster math entirely, because Ohtani effectively compresses 2 roster roles into one, and the rule exists to account for that compression. Without it, teams would be forced to sacrifice either bullpen depth or lineup strength to accommodate a two-way player. So the exemption isn't random, it's compensatory. But here's the hidden factor most people miss. The advantage isn't the ninth reliever. It's the interaction between Ohtani's role and bullpen deployment patterns. When Ohtani pitches, he also hits. That means the Dodgers don't need to use a bench bat in his spot, which means fewer substitutions, which means more stability in late-game lineup structure. Combine that with an extra reliever, and you get something powerful: continuity, fewer forced decisions, more optionality. That's where the real edge lives, not in the extra arm itself, but in how it reduces decision pressure across the entire game. Now let's talk about how this plays out in real situations. Imagine a standard game where the starter exits in the 5th inning. Most teams now need 4 innings from the bullpen. With 8 relievers, that likely means using at least one pitcher in a role they weren't ideally suited for. With 9, the Dodgers can stay closer to optimal matchups throughout. That difference might not show up in one game. But over 162, it compounds. That's how small structural edges become meaningful outcomes. The turning point in this debate isn't about fairness in isolation. It's about precedent. Because if one team gains a measurable advantage from a rule designed for a unique player, the league has to decide, do you standardize the rule, or do you accept asymmetry as part of innovation? That's the real tension. And there's no clean answer. If MLB removes the exemption, you risk discouraging two-way players. You're essentially telling teams, if you develop someone like Ohtani, you'll be penalized in roster construction. That limits evolution. But if you keep the rule, you create a scenario where one team, already advantaged in other ways, gains additional flexibility others don't have. That affects competitive balance. And in a sport built on long-term parity, that matters. Now let's shift perspective. Has this actually decided games yet? That's the question some fans are asking, and it's a fair one. Because advantages in baseball are rarely direct. You won't see a box score that says ninth reliever wins game. Instead, you see subtle effects. A rested arm in the 8th inning, a matchup that favors the pitcher instead of the hitter, a bullpen that doesn't collapse in a 3-game stretch. These are indirect outcomes, but they're real, and over time, they separate elite teams from merely good ones. For the Dodgers, this rule fits perfectly into their broader strategy. They don't just rely on talent, they optimize structure. Every edge, financial, analytical, developmental, is layered together. The ninth reliever isn't the foundation, it's an amplifier. It enhances everything else they already do well. That's why the criticism feels sharper, because it's not happening in isolation. It's happening on a team that already maximizes every advantage available. Now zoom out to the bigger picture. Ohtani is forcing baseball into a new era, not just stylistically, but structurally. The rules were built for specialization. Pitchers pitch, hitters hit. Roster limits reflect that separation. But Ohtani breaks it, and once that happens, the system has to adapt. The question is whether that adaptation should be neutral or whether it inevitably creates imbalance. Because here's the reality. You can't design rules for a once-in-a-century player without affecting competitive dynamics. That's unavoidable. So the league isn't really deciding whether the rule is fair. It's deciding what it values more, uniformity or evolution. In the end, this debate isn't about one extra reliever. It's about what happens when a player is so unique that the game bends around him, and whether that bending creates opportunity or advantage. Right now, it's doing both. And until the league decides which one matters more, this tension isn't going anywhere. It's not a pitch, it's not a swing, it's a rule. And suddenly, that rule is putting Shohei Ohtani right in the middle of baseball's most uncomfortable debate. Because while the Los Angeles Dodgers keep winning, the rest of the league is starting to ask why it feels easier for them to do it. That's the hook. At 15-5, the Dodgers look exactly like a powerhouse should. Stacked roster, deep rotation, elite everything. But according to insider Jim Bowden, there's something else hiding in plain sight. A ninth reliever. Not 8, like every other team. 9. And it's all because of Ohtani. Here's how it works. Ohtani is classified as a two-way player. That allows the Dodgers to carry an extra bullpen arm without sacrificing elsewhere on the roster. On paper, it's a technicality. In reality, it's an edge, an extra pitcher in late innings. More flexibility, more margin for error. And when you're already the richest, deepest team in baseball, that margin matters. That's where the tension builds, because Bowden didn't just question it, he called it out. He's fine with Ohtani hitting when he pitches. That's part of what makes him special. But the extra roster spot, that's where he draws the line. Because now it's not just about a unique player, it's about competitive balance. And once that word enters the conversation, that's the turning point. Because this isn't just a Dodgers story anymore. It's a league problem. Fans are split. Some say this is the price of greatness. You get a once-in-a-generation player, you build rules around him. Others, they see it differently. They see a loophole, a system bending just enough to give one team more than everyone else, and not just any team, the Dodgers. A franchise already loaded with stars like Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Roki Sasaki, already spending more, already winning more. So now the question hits harder. Do they really need more help? Because here's the reality. Ohtani isn't just producing, he's dominating. At the plate, on the mound, 50-game on-base streak, near untouchable pitching numbers. He's already the advantage. So when the rules start adding to that, that's when the league starts to feel it. The impact, potentially massive. If MLB changes the rule, it's a direct hit to how the Dodgers manage games. Late innings get tighter, bullpen decisions get harder, that extra cushion disappears. But if nothing changes, then this becomes the new normal. And every contender chasing October has to deal with it. Not just Ohtani the player, but Ohtani the exception. One rule, one roster spot, one detail that doesn't show up in highlights, but could shape an entire season. Because in a sport built on inches and margins, this might be the smallest advantage with the biggest consequences.